Today on the Criss Cross Cinema Podcast, East meets West with Bad Day at Black Rock and Yojimbo. But is their genre Eastern or Western? Today on the Criss Cross Cinema Podcast.
Two fellows meet accidentally, like you and me. No connection between them at all. Never saw each other before. They swap murders. Criss Cross.
Wilson! I'm sorry, Wilson! A day may come when the courage of men fails, but it is not this day.
You gotta keep breathing, because tomorrow the sun will rise. Who knows what the tide could bring?
Hello and welcome to the Criss Cross Cinema Podcast, where we crisscross cinema history to find connections you may have never recognized. Today's two films were made an ocean apart, but their stories are closer than you'd think. They both share common tropes that define an entire genre. 1955's Bad Day at Black Rock and 1961's Yojimbo. Hi, my name is Aaron Wilson, and I'm an artist trying not to starve.
And I'm Mark Klobus, a teacher who is trying to just get new insight into movies.
If you like what you hear on today's show, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Transcend Entertainment. That's TRANSCEND Entertainment. On today's episode, as always, we'll review our two films, and by the end, we go crisscross to compare and contrast them both. But first, Mark, what have you been watching?
Well, I've been watching a couple things, but the one that really stands out is Masters of the Air. I have seen the first 3 episodes so far, and it's very interesting. It's definitely evocative of its influences in terms of the preceding films that Spielberg and Hanks did, the miniseries, The Pacific and Band of Brothers. But I'm watching it and I'm comparing it to one of my all-time favorites, which is 12 O'Clock High, which is a 1949 film about bombers in England early in the war, which is basically the same premise as this. And one of the things I really find fascinating is, 12 O'Clock High, again, I enjoy great performances, including one of the actors that is in Bad Day, Black Rock, Dean Jagger, great performance in it, Gregory Peck, great performance. But it is so very much Air Force propaganda. It's one of the things I love about it is this argument the Air Force was advancing, and the film was made right around the time the Air Force was becoming an independent service, and they were making their case for how they won the war. And Masters of the Air has a very different take, and one that I would argue is more historically accurate, which is the fact that we sent these men in these planes, we had all these grandiose ideas, and it was just brutal what they went through. Now, granted, the miniseries focuses upon what was regarded as a particularly unlucky crew, but nonetheless, it really underscores what the sacrifice was in maybe, although only 3 episodes in, how pointless it kind of was, because in the sense that they didn't really achieve what they did. But it's fascinating viewing. I'm not going to give a sense as to how it compares ultimately to Pacific or Band of Brothers until I've seen the whole thing. But so far, I'm enjoying it. What have you been watching?
I just saw Escape from Alcatraz again. That's a really good movie. There's some familiar faces in there from my past, what I've been seeing.
Well, Patrick McGoohan is one that stands out for me.
Yeah. Patrick McGoohan as the warden, and Robert Blossom as Doc. Patrick McGoohan was in The Prisoner, and Robert Blossom was in Home Alone. So he's the old guy with the shovel. One thing they do really well there is they have a charged object. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's a Brian McDonald term of a storytelling device where you take an object, you put it in a scene. I'll just take the example of the one that's in this one. There's a dandelion that he paints in his self-portrait, Doc, Robert Blossom. And he actually has the dandelion in his pocket. And it turns out later on that this plays a key role in several key scenes. And at the end of the movie, right before they escape, the warden crushes that dandelion and throws it on the floor. And I won't tell you what happens after that, but it's a great use of a charged object. Just taking a normal, ordinary object and giving it meaning by the context that it's in. And then by the end of the movie, it means something more. And at the very end, they have another allusion to that, but I won't give that away. Anyway, it's great storytelling. And listen to Brian McDonald if you're interested in storytelling. It's his podcast, You Are a Storyteller, on YouTube. Just chef's kiss. He's a great storyteller. So, just as always, we'll be diving deep. Fair warning, here there be spoilers. Now our review of Bad Day at Black Rock.
So my first question is, what was your exposure to the film prior to us choosing it for one of our movies? That's
a good question, because that's actually why I chose that one. I just wanted to watch Bad Day at Black Rock. I'd seen it a couple times. One time when I was really young, the same time that I was influenced by Hitchcock and North by Northwest, I watched that, and it's not a suspense movie, but it is a thriller. And anyway, but I remembered the Jeep scene at the end with the Molotov cocktail and everything leading up to that. It's just a great movie, and it was a joy to watch it again. So
my experience with it was really fascinating for me, because there was a period in my life where I really started to getting into, classic cinema.
Right.
Which I guess for anybody is, the cinema that was there before, they started watching movies, Yeah.
You look at ones before you were born.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, growing up, there were certain movies that always stood out. There was, and these are all the familiar ones: Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, Casablanca, and so forth.
Yeah.
And then as I'm getting into it, I'm like, okay, what's this film Bad Day at Black Rock? And the title is just so B-movie-ish.
Right.
It is kind of like, okay. It is, my first thought was, okay, I'm not, doesn't seem very interesting. And then it's like, well, but it's got Spencer Tracy. It's got Robert Ryan. It's got Ernest Borgnine. It's got Lee Marvin.
Yeah.
It's got Anne Francis.
Stacked.
Yeah.
As you said before.
And there's this disparity at first glance, which is like, okay, kind of a cheesy title and an A-list cast. And then I watched it and I was just blown away by how good it was. And what stood out for me, and this is something I thought about as I was watching it again, is what genre would you put it in?
Oh, well, okay. I kind of cheated by looking it up. But, the ones they have them listed as aren't always accurate. But I'd say thriller to begin with. But it's also a Western, which is great lead into what we're going to be covering in the episode.
For me, it's like, it's one of those, that's a question that if it was a multiple choice question, the answer would be all the above, because it covers so many genres: the thriller, the Western, there's a noir element to it. And it's also a problem film. In that category of films where, and you still see these in Hollywood, although they don't get quite that same high profile. This is a problem film like they did back in the 30s and 40s, which is that it's a film about that's, from my perspective, surprisingly advanced in how it tackles racism for a film made in the mid 1950s.
Yeah. I
mean, it's a film that comes out, just as the civil rights movement is really gaining steam. It's a film that comes out right when Americans still really have not come to terms with a lot of what they did during the Second World War regarding Japanese Americans. And in that sense, it is, I think for the 1950s, and even I would say to a degree today, very progressive for its time.
Yeah. So by problem film, you mean civil rights?
Civil rights, racism.
Okay.
And kind of doing right by a group that suffered oppression.
Yeah.
And that was, of course, is what which is represented by Komoko. Although it's interesting how, it's a film in which you have this racism towards Japanese Americans at the center of it, and there is not a single non-white face in the movie.
Right.
I mean, maybe there was like an extra or two on the train, but as I'm thinking back to it, it's a film about racism, and everyone in it is white.
Yeah, and that's kind of the story premise of everybody is racist against this Japanese guy, but kind of comes with the territory. And it would be a big spoiler to tell you why he's not in the movie. But I guess we did say spoilers, but
we'll get to it.
Yeah, we'll get to it.
There's one other element though that I think is really fascinating and that I really enjoyed about it. And this kind of harkens back to some of the things that I connect with as I watch a lot of these films, which is how it's commentary and analysis of masculinity.
Yeah.
And this is something that, you could talk about, it's a man's world. We have a patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera. But I find in this one, I enjoyed the nuanced nature of it. This wasn't a swaggering figure, a John Wayne-esque figure. This wasn't, we're going to, we're going to just, be macho about it. It's more subtle and nuanced.
Yeah, definitely. There's a scene in here that we'll get to, but it's the restaurant scene.
Yes.
that just really hits on that. And we'll get there when we get there.
Yes.
But I thought that was earlier in the movie when I was watching it, and it's like 3/4 of the way through.
The same. One of my favorite lines in it is one I associate with the restaurant scene, but it actually comes earlier when McReady, Spencer Tracy's character, has his first encounter with Lee Marvin's character.
Yeah.
And afterward, when Lee Marvin is, assessing what happens about, and I can't remember the exact phrasing of it, but, does he give? And Lee Marvin's like, well, he gives too easily.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And how, how that's interpreted as maybe.
I love that attitude of like, he doesn't feel like he has to prove himself to this guy. He's just like, okay, you're doing your thing. Like you're trying to intimidate me, but I don't care. I'll get another room.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Okay. So we open this movie on these crazy train shots that I don't know how they got back in the time. They're kind of shaky. So I read how they got this one. I mean, cool. It's such a great opening. But apparently what they did was they had the helicopter. It's a scene of a diesel train speeding through the desert, and it zooms up to the train from the front. You think it's going to hit it or something. Yeah. They did that in reverse. They had the helicopter. Oh, that makes sense.
Fly back, and they just ran it in reverse.
But the train must be going in reverse too.
No. They just simply had the helicopter speed back faster.
Oh, I see.
And then when they ran it back, it looked like it was rushing up to the train.
Yeah, but I mean, when you reverse the film, it would reverse the direction of the train. So maybe they could have had an engine on the back, and it's going away from the. Yeah. Huh. You kind of got to think backward when you're filming these shots, because I have done that, and it's a really indie thing of like, I've got a shot in Surviving the Zombie Plague or zombie comedy where he stabs a zombie in the eyes with this fire poker thing. And you don't want to do that. So we started by his eyes and pulled it back and reversed the shot. Yeah. And everybody cringes at that shot. So it works.
And you see these shots in cinema all the time. And I think for me, the qualifying difference is whether it's obvious they're doing it.
Yeah.
Like it's like when to give it a different. And
it wasn't because I didn't see it.
Exactly. And it gets, I mean, John Sturges, who's the director, this was really when he was at the height of his craft. He did this, ended up doing, Great Escape a few years later. I mean, he really was doing quite well, but his is not one of the names you're as familiar with. Like, he's not Cecil B. DeMille. He's not
John Ford.
Exactly. Yeah. He's not one of these truly Michael Curtis. He's not one of the truly, famous directors from the period. And yet he was very good at what he did. So.
Right. I would be very happy if I had that kind of status, but yeah. Anyway.
And of course, what then do you see with the train? But it does something that nobody is expecting. It stops. And it stops in this town.
Yeah, tiny town in the middle of nowhere, one street.
Yeah, I just love how all these people, all the inhabitants it's like their jaws just like collectively drop. Huh?
Yeah.
It's like they're so shocked. They have to just sit there and like, what's going to happen next? And it really is kind of a neat storytelling thing, in that they're waiting for the person who's going to drive the plot.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And then off he steps.
They're probably just bored as heck, and they're like, oh, something's happening. But the reaction of all these people as they stare at him going through town is just the creepiest thing.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Because there's no welcome. There's
Yeah.
no from anybody. They're instantly
This town does not want him here.
exactly. They're so guarded. They can and this is where you could play around with the title a bit. You know, the bad day is the fact that a stranger showed up.
Yeah, bad day for them.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And so they're instantly like, this can't possibly be good for us. But before we want to go further, there's this line that this great foreshadowing line when John McCready, Spencer Tracy's character, steps off the train, and the conductor he's talking to the conductor, and McCready says, "Oh, I'm only going to be here for 24 hours."
Yeah.
Because he's already made arrangements for the next train to come by and stop and pick him up the next day. And the conductor says, in a place like this, it could be a lifetime.
Right.
And it's such a great line of foreshadowing, maybe a little, just a touch too obvious, but it is nonetheless.
I love it. I'd side with clarity over trying to hold the cards close to your chest anytime.
Yeah. And it's the kind of thing where by the time you get to the film, you reflect back, it really has only been about 24 hours covered in this movie.
Right. Yeah.
And so much happens.
Yeah. It does not feel like a day.
Yeah.
I'd love the attitude of him coming into town. He's just so nonchalant about it. And it foils so well with the town's reaction to him of we're just like, okay, this is a normal guy walking into town. Why are they so...
Yeah.
There's a big creepy vibe to it.
And he picks up on it right away, but initially he isn't too suspicious. He doesn't see what he's doing as being terribly innocuous.
Yeah, he's just coming to a town and he's checking into a hotel and he's going to visit a guy and do what he has to do.
Yeah. And this is something that they talk about a little bit later in the movie, and he's kind of wrapping up his life. He sees this as he has this one thing that he needs to do. And then it's kind of like, this is the last thing that gives his life purpose.
Yeah.
But he thinks, it's not like he's talking about, climbing Mount Everest,
right,
or some other, very challenging task. He thinks this is just going to be so simple.
And I wish they would have mentioned that earlier, because that actually, we'll get to that. It's his arc is contingent on that, but you don't learn what his intentions coming in were until the end.
Yeah.
So you're told what his intentions were, and then what the end of his arc is in the same line, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I don't know.
I understand exactly what you're saying, which is that they ask what he's doing. He doesn't explain why he's there. He's just basically saying, I'm looking for this guy named Kamoko.
Yeah.
And
it would be interesting if they told the audience in some way just his state that he is in his life. Like, I guess you could pick up on that of, it seems like he's not anywhere, which is very similar to Yojimbo. Of Sanjuro is very, they demonstrate his waywardness with the throwing of the stick.
Yes.
And then he's so wayward, he doesn't know which direction he wants to go. But
there's an aspect though that instantly defines how they see him. And that is the fact that McCready's left arm is in effect pinned to his body.
Yeah.
And the way, and this is something they never really, they make it overt in a couple of lines of dialogue between the other characters, but they instantly categorize him. They're wary. He is a suspicious figure, but he's also what they would call at the time a cripple.
Right.
And so they look at him and they think, okay, we have to be on our guard, but how dangerous can this guy be?
Yeah. It creates a certain tension.
Yes.
And when things get more dangerous, that crippledness makes more tension for him.
Yes, it does.
And we'll see when it gets to the head at the restaurant, but it's so great.
Oh, yes. Well, I want to go back to the wariness. He goes to the hotel, and you would think that if there's one place that's going to be happy for him, because he's about to give them business, it's the hotel. And there's the clerk, and he's the one character whose name I didn't write down. Right. And he's like, well, we're all booked up. And McCready looks over and there are all the keys on the hooks. And he's like, looks like you got plenty of room. And well, those are, cowboys. And he's making excuses. But I love that lobby because so much of the film is advanced in that lobby.
Right.
And you get a sense of that early on because you have in the lobby the people who become essentially the opposing poles in the movie. You have the two sides. You have Hector, who is for the moment the representative of the main antagonist, and then you have Doc,
right,
who is the, you might think of as what amounts to what represents the town's moral center,
right,
such as it is, and how they're on like the opposite sides of this room. They're both, watching MacReady trying to get a room, and they're trying to, it's like, what are they going to do? You're seeing them sizing up the situation, trying to figure out how to respond to this. And then of course, when MacReady does get a room and Hector goes and challenges him, and it's like you're getting they're trying to figure him out. But, and this is, again, Tracy's such a fantastic actor.
Oh, for sure.
He's just so good at sort of, at playing this guy who's just keeping his cards to his chest, not because he's where, he's just, that's just who he is.
Yeah.
And it kind of, you get a sense that there's something going on with him, that he is dealing with something, but it's not showy. It's not overt. It just, that's just him. And he's kind of like, I'm just going to not be any trouble not because I'm scared. It's just not who I am.
Yeah. He doesn't get why they're making such a big deal out of it.
Exactly. But then who enters the situation?
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Smith. And Reno Smith and his right-hand thug, Coley Trimble. One of the things I find fascinating about this Ernest Borgnine's presence in the movie is that he does this film with Spencer Tracy. And Spencer Tracy gets an Oscar nomination for this role.
Mm-hmm.
And he loses it. And he loses it to Ernest Borgnine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he loses
in
it
a different movie?
Yeah, this was the year that Borgnine won it for Marty.
Right.
Which
I've seen that movie too.
Which ended up making his reputation. And there's this great story that I read about where after Borgnine won, Tracy was very gracious. He sent him a telegram congratulating him, and Borgnine never responded. And the next time he saw Borgnine, he was giving Borgnine grief for this, and not in a joking way. He was kind of like, you ungrateful, why didn't you do this? And Hepburn, who was there, basically said, come on, Spencer, he's the one who won. Why are you giving him grief for not responding to your telegram?
Yeah.
But I mean, it gets a sense of just how stacked this cast is. You have Spencer Tracy, who won 2 Oscars. You have Walter Brennan playing Doc. He was a 3-time Oscar winner. You had Borgnine, who was on the cusp of winning his Oscar. You have Dean Jagger playing the sheriff. He won an Oscar for 12 O'Clock High. And then you have, Robert Ryan, who was a nominee. I mean, there's just so many A-list actors in this.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a relatively small cast.
It would be like today if there were Matt Damon. Oh, it would be like Oppenheimer today, except it's just a smaller movie. But
yeah, exactly. Imagine Oppenheimer with 10 actors, and it's like Rami Malek and Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr. and all these other A-listers that are there. And it's just those 10 or so who are interacting with each other, and that's what this movie is. And so you got Lee Marvin, who would also go on to win an actor and win an Oscar in a few years, and they're just all bringing their A game in this. And
and again, to go back to your thinking the title was a B movie thing, like it's great material they're working with too.
Oh, so, yes. I mean, it's such a well-written movie. So, but one of the things, and this gets to, Tracy doing his thing, is how he's gradually sensing that the town's wariness is tied to tied to this person he's here to see.
Yeah.
And where you see that is in what is, I think, in a lot of ways, the showiest performance, which is Dean Jagger's as Tim Horn, the sheriff. Mm-hmm. And I love that name, Tim Horn, because it's so close to tin horn, which is supposed to be which is a like a slang term for someone who is, kind of an amateur who's not really a true cowboy. And he shows up and Sheriff Tim Horn is just, you get the impression instantly, is not exactly great at his job.
Yeah.
He's sleeping in his jail cell.
Yeah. And he's kind of the standard cowardly sheriff.
Yeah. He's practically begs McReady not to close the jail door.
Yeah.
On him.
It's hilarious.
It is. And then, of course, when he's sitting at his desk and McReady says, I'm here looking for a man named Komoko. And Jagger, and this is, and by showy, I mean, relative to everyone else, but Jagger instantly demonstrates that, his character is like, oh my gosh, because he kind of, he grabs for the bottle, he misses, nearly knocks it over, and McReady catches it for him. And it's kind of like, hey, calm down there. But he's already sensing that there's something that there's a secret that these people are not happy with, and it's tied to Komoko, but he's not going to let it go.
Right.
He's going to, because again, this matters.
Yeah. He's the guy that he's there to see, and it's clearly very important to him.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then you get that first confrontation with McReady, between Smith and McReady.
Yeah.
And this is like watching. And this is in the hotel lobby. So yes.
Yeah.
It's like watching a duel between two master swordsmen in terms of the acting talent. You have Robert Ryan, who, to me, he's one of the underappreciated actors of the era, and you have Spencer Tracy, who is regarded as one of the greatest, if not the greatest actor of his generation, film actor of his generation, and Robert Ryan, it just matches him so nicely.
Yeah,
and the way it happens is that Smith is doing what Lee Marvin's character did earlier. He's probing.
Right.
And it's like, going back to the swordsman analogy, it's like he's thrusting, he's parrying, and McReady's just deflecting, and it's so effortless. And you could see how it's increasing Smith's anxiety.
Right.
The less he knows about this guy, or the less he discovers about this guy, the more anxious he gets.
Yeah.
And this comes out really, the tension builds. So then when Liz drives up, the one female character in the movie, she drives up in the Jeep. Before she kind of really clues on to what's happening, she gives McReady what McReady's been wanting, which is an ability to get out to Komoko's farm.
Right.
And he drives off, and then Smith just he vents on her. Yeah. He doesn't want to, he's trying to, put up a solid front for McReady, but you could tell that inside he's like this, his little world, his little empire, which is what Black Rock is on the verge of collapse. Yeah, and it's going at one little card, but this is the most important card in the deck. Exactly, and his house of cards is going to tumble. Exactly. This is a good place to address the genre. Yes, this is a thriller, but it's very much not a suspense thriller. With a suspense thriller, you tell as much as you can up front. This one, the tension, so it's tension you feel in this movie, is from you not knowing you know enough. There's something up with Komoko, and this is the red button that he should not be poking, but this is the one button that he's coming to push. And so that's where the tension comes from in this. So it's not suspense so much it is tension, that it just builds and builds and builds until it releases at the end. And it's a great way to do a thriller. Oh, yes. Especially when they don't, and this is one of the other things I love about this film, is that it's not a film that dumbs it down for its viewer. Right. So McReady goes to the farm, and it's a burnt out ruin, and it didn't happen yesterday. It's been, it's been a gutted, remnant of a building for years. Yeah. And there is this, small collection of wildflowers. Mm-hmm. And he goes over and he picks one. He kind of, contemplates it for a bit. And so, and later it's explained what it is he's deduced. Yeah. But, a lot of people have already figured it out, but it's a very quiet scene. It's a very contemplative scene. And my mom actually
figured this out right away. She's like, oh, it's a grave. And I'm like, oh.
Exactly. Yeah. He realizes that he this is the point at which he puts together and realizes the secret of the town.
Yeah.
And then he you have actually I've already, I skipped a couple of, conferring scenes where Smith has sent a telegram to Los Angeles to find out about MacReady, and he gets back that there's no record of MacReady, and you have that great conversation between the men of the town.
Yeah.
And it's basically Smith's men. It's Coley, it's Lee Marvin's character, Hector. There's the town clerk, and actually to write down, his name is Pete. And they've decided that, even before MacReady gets back, well, they're got to kill him.
Right, yeah.
They never say as much, but it's pretty clear.
That's the way the wind is blowing.
and then simultaneously, Doc goes over to the sheriff, and they're also conferring and trying to figure out what are they going to do. They never openly say what they know. It's never clear that they have confirmed what they suspect happened to Komoko.
Right.
But nonetheless, they are aware that, stuff's about to go down, and they have to decide what their role is going to be in it. And you get the impression that Doc is more inclined for action than the sheriff, who's looking to climb back into that bottle.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Where he's probably been for the past 4 years. So
yeah, quite literally in this case.
Yeah. But then you get that first assassination attempt or attempt to murder MacReady when he's driving back, right. And Coley drives up, and it's one of those subtle ways that they demonstrate MacReady's ability. He is a one-armed man driving a Jeep, and he manages to survive this attempt. Coley's in a bigger car, a more capable car. He does run MacReady off the road, but MacReady recovers.
Yeah.
And it's funny when he gets back to town, Coley's car is in worse condition than the Jeep.
It's banged up the whole front.
Exactly. Yeah. But of course there is nonetheless the whole, and this is really the first action sequence in the movie.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
and it's a good point to bring up as they are gone to the house and driving back, etc. Mr. Smith and his goons are standing on the train tracks, and they have these great shots, like tons of shots of just all these people standing on the tracks. And it gives Mr. Smith this big sense of power of like he's in control of the whole town, basically.
And those clues are scattered throughout the movie. Like the moment that when Smith drives up with Coley at the beginning, when we first see him, they're always referring to him as Mr. Smith.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not Coley, Hector, Pete. These are people. Small town. They're intimate. They all know each other. And yet he is
Mr. Smith.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and this Mr. Smith is not going to Washington.
No, he is not. He wants to, Washington and everyone else to stay far clear of his little fiefdom. So, and we'll be getting to that in just a bit. So then, MacReady gets to town, and I just so love this. It's obvious he wants to get out, but he's not panicking. It's almost like he kind of senses that this isn't going to work, but he's got to try it anyway. Is there a train coming? Nope, not till the next day. Well, what about the Jeep? Suddenly, the Jeep is no longer available for rent.
Yeah.
So he's realizing he's stuck.
Yeah, the walls are closing in on him.
Mm-hmm. And then you get that wonderful second confrontation with MacReady, with Smith.
Yeah,
where he
this scene is so great. If I had to pick one scene, it would probably be this one.
Oh, it is. The speech is just so perfect, and it's one that I think it encapsulates so well how so many people, living in the West, deal with the mythology of the West, and this interaction with mythology is one of the things that makes this not a true Western, but more like a neo-Western,
right?
Because it inverts so many of the tropes,
right?
You have, for example, so often it's the small town people who are virtuous and the outsiders or the crooks. This time, though, no, it's the outsider, the city slicker who's coming in, and he's the virtuous one. And
the whole town is crooked.
Exactly. Yeah. They've either participated in the corruption, or they've enabled the corruption, or they've sat back and let the corruption happen and done nothing for years. I mean, I think you have the line written.
Yeah, I've got that line.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so someone is always looking for something in this part of the West. To the historians, it's the Old West. To the book writer, it's the Wild West. To the businessman, it's the undeveloped West. They say we're all poor and backwards, and I guess we are. But this West is our West. And I wish they would leave us alone.
And McCready instantly snaps back to do what?
Yeah.
And,
so good.
That's
kind of got that, is it Kyudo or
Judo?
Judo, or whichever one you take the weight of the other opponent and you turn it on them.
Exactly.
That's the way he acts, the way he talks. And later on, you'll see the way he attacks.
And it is just to me, it is the best confrontation in the movie, because you see Smith starting to unravel his frustration, his anger, and especially since you see how his calmness is opposed. He talks about how, I'm not a person who gets angry. And
you can see his inner thing unraveling of, he thinks he's got a good reason for this, but he really doesn't. And just the slightest influence of an outside idea, and it just unravels his whole thing.
And McCready knows exactly which buttons to push. He's, I'm not an angry man. Well, you were angry at the Japanese. Oh, well, that was different.
Yeah.
And he almost gets Smith to confess. It's just so, and yet, and
he'd make a good detective.
Oh, he would. So,
yeah.
So then Smith decides he's going to try, if he can't escape, he's going to bring the authorities to him. And you have the effort to call the state police, and Pete's like, well, all the lines are busy. So then he tries to send the telegram. And this is when you see Doc making his choice.
Right.
And he's decided he's going to help out. He's going to try to drive Smith. He's going to try to drive McCready out of town, and using his hearse, this even for 1955, this antiquated hearse.
Yeah, it looks like it's a carriage, but it's a car.
Yeah, this might have been, the hearse the first hearse that Henry Ford built,
or Adam's family drives around.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, it doesn't work, but not because it's old and broken down, but because Hector, what Smith's, other right hand man sabotages it.
Yeah.
And it's not even subtlety. It's like, well, maybe it's the cable is broken, and then he reaches in and rips out a whole chunk of it. Like, yep, it's the cable.
Yeah, and I like Doc's line before this of "get out of town like a whisper."
Yes,
and that does not happen.
Yeah, he was literally, I think, going to smuggle McCready out. If not in a coffin, in a hearse.
Yeah,
which of course is something that we'll actually be returning to with the other film. When Sanjuro gets smuggled out of town.
Oh, yeah.
So because the hearse fails, McCready decides he's going to go with the telegram, and then he goes to the diner. And
the telegraph, I just love the line of, "I'm just a good neighbor," and he's like, "Were you a good neighbor to Komoko?"
Yeah, and that's where you really get this. He's definitely letting on. He's figured everything out.
Yeah.
So, he doesn't have the specifics, but he knows exactly what happens, and he knows that everybody in town knows.
Yeah. So then we got to that great bar scene.
Oh my gosh.
And I when I got there, I'm like, "Oh, it's here." And I could have sworn it happened like in the first quarter of the movie, but it doesn't. This is actually, I'll get into nerdy structure stuff after this scene, but it's just so great. He's just sitting at the bar, and then Ernest Borgnine's character comes in, and he starts
pushing
him. He's like, "That's my stool," and he's like, "Okay, I'll move over to the next one." And he's like, "You know what? Okay." He goes up and he sits on his stool, and then he swivels around, and he's like, "You know what? I think I like that one." And he's like, "Okay, just tell me where you want to sit." And
and as Coley's doing this to McCready, you have Hector, you have Smith. Basically, Smith's entire gang is there.
Yeah,
and they're just
That's kind of the whole movie. They're just people sitting against the walls, staring at him, and this tension coming from all sides.
And they're waiting. It's funny. While Coley's prodding him, he's waiting for McCready to do something in return. He cannot just sit there and punch McCready or drag him out. He has to have McCready react a certain way. So really, even though it is Smith's entire gang there, they're all basically waiting for McCready to do something.
And of course, like any great villain, Mr. Smith thinks he's in the right.
Yes.
He's like, I just got to give this guy a reason, or he's got to give me a reason, and then I'll dispense justice and kick him out of my town.
And how difficult can that be? Because McCready is a one-arm, he's a cripple.
Yeah. And
so Coley finally finds, a way to get the fight that he wants. And what does McCready do?
Karate chops him. I love this scene. I actually based this is neither here nor there, but my favorite game is Fallout New Vegas. And the first time I played it as his character. As I was making my character in that game, I'm like, what would I like him to be like? And I somehow arrived on making him an old man. And I'm like, oh yeah, like Bad Day at Black Rock, an old man that can handle himself. Oh, I love that. And
it's like, one-armed, he is more capable than Coley, who is, as Smith's right-hand man, is probably his physically most able, guy. And he just...
Despite his girth.
Yeah, despite his girth, yeah. He was rapidly becoming the Ernest Borgnine we would all come to know in future projects. But he was still like big, tough guy, and he just handles him.
Yeah,
and
completely.
And the way he pulls the knife out of Coley's pocket and then just contemptuously, dumps it in front of Smith. Basically, he's demonstrating. I mean, it's not that he's not afraid, but he's not going to be intimidated.
Yeah, and he does it with just a couple moves too. Of like, nowadays, like you'd see the temptation of modern movies to make it like a big kung fu whatever fight with all these different moves, but it's just so minimalist, just like he is with everything.
And McCready does something else, I think, that sets the stage for what happens in the climax, which is he starts undermining Smith's trust in his men. Which is, there's this obvious point. Why didn't Smith just have McCready killed at that moment? There are too many witnesses.
Yeah.
And he says, well, maybe, he's saying he's needling Smith. This whole thing's unraveling. Can you really trust your men anymore? So, and you can see Smith beginning, even though he doesn't show it, that maybe he can think, I no longer have the control that I once did.
Yeah.
And who's to say now that maybe there are too many people who've seen too many things, and there's a difference between, doing what happened to Komoko, which still has not really been, fully explained yet. And this mysterious guy who, for all we know, could be, a cop, he could have connections because we still don't know anything really about him.
Yeah.
And we don't even know why he's trying to find Komoko yet.
Yeah, that's why I say it's not suspense. There's so much in the dark about this movie.
Yeah, and so Smith kind of feels how it's eroding and how all these men that he trusts they're not getting the job done, and because he probably thinks that they're weaker than him, which one of them might give way first. But of course, it's not his men that are the weaker ones in the town. It's it's the sheriff.
Yeah.
And you get that great scene at the hotel when McCready discovers that his telegram was not sent. And that's a serious crime. It's, it's kind of like you're interfering with communications. It's a federal crime.
And actually, before we get to this, the end of that scene is beginning of Act 3, where he finally accuses Mr. Smith of killing Komoko.
I missed that.
Yeah.
that was when it became overt. So,
yeah.
But you had the confrontation in the hotel. And it's the thing I love about that scene it is that it symbolizes the formalization of the breakdown of law that has been there since before the movie began.
Right.
Where there's Doc is saying, well,
Mr. Smith is the law in this town.
Yeah, exactly. Because Doc is saying, that the telegraph operator, he's he's broken federal law. This is where the sheriff needs to do his job and, slap the manacles on the guy. And what does Smith do instead? He takes the badge off of the sheriff.
That's so scary. He just puts it on
Hector.
Yeah. Okay. What is the actor's name?
Lee Marvin.
Yeah, Lee Marvin. Yeah. He's just so good at playing slimy bad guy.
Oh yeah. I mean, he takes that role to 11 in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Oh right, yeah.
When he plays Liberty Valance. Yeah. So, but it's just although I like what he does a little bit later on, where you could tell that he's not quite that same in charge character when he's trying to twirl his gun, and because he's trying now I'm the sheriff and he's trying to do fancy stuff with his gun and he can't even put it fully in his holster.
Yeah.
So
I didn't pick up on that. I did like the match thing though, where wasn't he like lighting matches and throwing them at McCready? Yeah.
Yeah. But there's the sense that that law order. The only person that decides these things in this town is Smith. He really is the power. Yeah. And Robert Ryan just does such a good job. You never question why his men defer to him. You never question why they call him Mr. Smith. I mean, compared to McCready, he's wilting, but he still is very much the brains of the operation. And then Smith and his men just walk out, and you've got McCready, you've got Doc, you've got the sheriff, you've got Pete. And McCready finally explains why he's there. And this is something that I think we were more familiar with it today than the audience would have been in 1955, which is you learn about the fact that during the war, and this is something we forgot to mention, which is that this movie is set in 1945. Yeah. It's immediate. It's at the very end it's after World War II has just ended, and McCready is a vet, and we learned that he was an officer. He had served in Italy. That came out earlier in his second confrontation with Smith, and that he had suffered the injury that had immobilized his left arm in combat, and that Komoko had a son, who had saved him, and you don't really learn the details of that relationship. Right. Although there's perhaps the suggestion that maybe it was from Komoko's son that he might have learned the martial arts that
makes sense. Yeah.
And that he had died, but he'd won a medal, and McCready was there to give it to Komoko. Yeah. And you get a sense of McCready's sense of honor, but also the fact that he kind of feels like he's done with life because he doesn't want to keep it for himself. He wants to give it to someone who will appreciate it. McCready doesn't feel. You begin. It's really here you begin to realize McCready doesn't himself feel like he's much of a man. Yeah, and it's. I mean, he is physically not the man he once was. He can only use one hand, one arm. He's very effective at it. Yeah, but he's not that person, and he kind of he's been questioning his self-worth, and this gets to me, I think, the genius of Tracy, which is that you don't see it in the film at all, and yet when McCready says this, it's instantly believable. Right. In this, you can kind of say, yeah, I can see why. Maybe that's why he was being maybe just a little bit deferential. But he was perhaps, it wasn't just the fact that he was also a bit, perhaps doubting himself.
Yeah. And the reason this works is because it was dramatized all the way through this. You show it actually happening in the story. Mm-hmm. So you may not have picked up on it. So maybe I'm going back on what I said at the beginning, but it's better to not say it at the beginning and actually dramatize it this is clearly a man he doesn't have a direction in his life, and he's got one arm but it reads true because they've played it out through the movie of he's felt like he's not the man he used to be. Mm-hmm. And going through this process, most importantly, giving him these trials allows him to see outwardly the man he is. So that restaurant scene is just it coming to a head of now we actually see it. And we're like, oh, dang. And there's actually a line from Doc when he comes in and he's like, man, oh, man, oh, man.
I hadn't picked up on that. So that's a good point. And the diner scene is just really is a climactic test.
Right.
Because you have, the earlier scene with the Jeep, and that's another test of his ability. Yeah. And he makes it explicit at this point where he says, basically he's found that resolve. He's found that purpose. He's felt affirmed as a capable man.
Yeah. And then this is perfect structure too. The end of his arc is right at the end of Act 2 going into Act 3. Yes. Where he accuses the main villain of killing Kamoko, and now it's him and Mr. Smith mano a mano into Act 3.
But he still is not trying. He doesn't plan on having a showdown.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's not his style at all.
But he has, I think, by virtue of his example of superior masculinity, turned Pete.
Yeah. This is an interesting reversal of a trope too, of usually what happens in these movies is the main character or somebody talks to the sheriff, usually John Wayne or someone, and they get them to stop being cowardly and do their job. This one, he doesn't. He's like, nope, gets out.
Yeah, the sheriff cuts and runs. Yes.
And then,
or the ex-sheriff.
Yeah, and then the guy that you would assume least of all, the clerk at the hotel, who's the brother to the girl that rented him the Jeep. He becomes the guy that comes on their side and gives them the stuff that they need, the information. I can't remember whatever.
He catches the plot to try to get Reedy out of town.
That's right. Yeah.
This is when you find out that it doesn't matter that he's the operator. The lines have been cut. So the only way that they can get out at this point is by using Liz's Jeep. And so he calls his sister, he tells his sister this is what they're going to do. And you're thinking, okay, now it's Pete and Liz. And this gets to Liz. And this is where you could argue maybe the film's, perhaps a bit more sexist than it ought to have been. But Liz really is an outlier in this movie. Yeah. She is this woman in a man's world. And the way she's portrayed, she is both feminine and not feminine. She operates the gas station.
And she rents out the Jeep and drives it around and does tasks. And
you get the impression she's the mechanic in the town. Yeah. And yet she also wears lipstick and she does her hair. And so she's very much of a woman. And yet at the same time, she's in a very masculine world. She is one of those who has accepted Reno Smith's dominance. Yeah. You get the impression maybe there's something more going on there as well. But in so many films, it's the woman who's like the moral conscience.
Yeah, it is interesting. I remember liking her at the end of this. Yes. From past viewings. And then I saw this and I'm like, that is not how I remember that going down.
Because, and I think that might come from the fact that she enables McCready's ability to go see the farm at the beginning.
Yeah, she seems like the one helper. Yeah. That Doc ends up taking that role.
But then, of course, you think that with Pete comes Liz. Pete basically says to Liz, this is what we're going to do. So Liz picks up McCready. They're going to smuggle him out at night. Yeah. And she drives him to Kamoko's farm. Yeah. And
it's Adobe Flats, which, sorry, this is complete distraction. I thought it was bizarre. It was a whole bunch of rocks. And it's like, why is this called Flats?
Exactly. And where's the Adobe?
Yeah, where's the Adobe?
So
maybe it was his house. Yeah. Maybe there was Adobe on wood or I don't know.
Or maybe those were the first people that they cleared out for the land. So yeah. So Liz gets to the farm, she stops the Jeep, and there is Smith with his rifle. He's going to shoot McCready, and McCready is not exactly surprised that this is how it turned out. But Liz is surprised to find out that she's done this for Smith. She is clearly on his side, and what thanks does she get?
None at all. He turns on her. Yeah.
She has failed to navigate the man's world. That even though she has done what Smith wanted, And this goes back to, I think, the scene earlier where McCready's undermining Smith's trust in his people because Hector's failed him. Pete has switched sides. And so he's figured, I can't trust Liz either. And he shoots her.
Yeah.
And it's almost heartbreaking in the sense that she just is just
almost because she turns on him.
Yeah. And so she's kind of, please don't. And it's, and you also see how Smith, who is introduced as a hunter at the beginning of the film, he's not a great shot.
I missed that. Yeah.
Well, it's when he drives up with Colt.
Oh, the deer in his car. Yeah.
He's wearing the hunting cap and the hunting gear. And so he I think it takes him like 3 or 4 shots before he finally gets her.
Yeah.
And then he's shooting McCready, who's hiding behind the Jeep.
Yeah.
And you got to think McCready's a goner.
Yeah, completely.
And what does he do?
He's so resourceful. It's so great. Mm-hmm. And just, for 1955, like just the filming of this. Okay. So he takes a bottle, unless you want to go.
No, go ahead. Okay. Go for it.
He takes a bottle, an empty bottle. I can't remember where it came from, but it's in the truck. And he's hiding under the truck. So he breaks, it might be the gas line, or it was a weird color that came out. So
I thought it was the brake fluid, but it could have been gas. I mean, it's like where he was positioned in the front.
My mom guessed transmission fluid. Yeah. That might be right because of the color, but whatever it is, it's flammable. Puts it in the bottle and he takes off his tie, rips out the center of the tie, like the white lining or the center of the tie. That's not the actual silk. And he puts it in the bottle, takes out his lighter, lights it up, throws it on Smith. Yeah, and I love the irony of Komoko died in a fire. Smith is now on fire.
Yes.
It's such poetic justice.
It is. And he doesn't die. McCready shows him his moral superiority by putting Smith out, but Smith at that point, he's done.
Right.
And then McCready returns to town. He has Smith, he has Liz's body, and he finds that Sheriff Horn has found his courage and he has rounded up Smith's men. He was. Oh,
I missed that part. That's good.
Yeah. So that definitely happens off screen, but it's climactic in the sense that McCready doesn't have to go and fight all of Smith's
the entire town.
Yeah. He's taken out Smith, and it's kind of like he got the boss battle out of the way, and that's kind of resolved everything. And then you cut to morning, and the state police have arrived, and McCready leaves. But before he leaves, he gives the medal to Doc, and you get the impression that Doc still has faith in the town, but McCready, he's kind of like, I'm not optimistic, but here, if you think the medal's going to help the town rebuild, you can have it.
Yeah.
Hopefully, some good will come from all the sacrifice.
And he did what he came to do. He gave the medal, not to Komoko because he's not there, but.
And then he rides out of town, not on a horse, but on a streamliner train.
Off into the sunset. There's no sunset.
Off to the sunrise or what have you. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's, such an amazing film.
Yeah, so good. Okay, so that was our review of Bad Day at Black Rock. Now, our review of Yojimbo. Okay, this is a great film.
Oh, it is. And it's one that I only came to very recently. I had not seen, I mean, it's one of these films.
Yeah, same.
You hear about it all the time, and yet it's, and you hear, and of course, everyone talks about the references. There are films that are more, and from an American perspective, accessible, which reference this film. And of course, we're talking about a Fistful of Dollars and Last Man Standing. But people always talk about Yojimbo, that's the reference. And it's like, yeah, I should watch it sometime. And then I did. And I'm kind of like, I've never seen A Fistful of Dollars. It's the only one in the trilogy I've never seen.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I've never seen Last Man Standing. And yet after watching this, it's hard for me to imagine ever seeing those and not finding that they don't measure up to Yojimbo.
Yeah.
It's that good.
It is so good.
It is.
Yeah. So made in 1961. This one's black and white. So going into this, I assumed it was made before Bad Day at Black Rock. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we're going to do an interesting thing with this. And I guess as a framing mechanism, I'll just tell you what we're doing. We're going to be comparing Western tropes. And I know that's ironic with an Eastern movie, but we've gotten a lot of great Westerns from Akira Kurosawa films and other stuff. The most obvious one is Seven Samurai and The Magnificent Seven. And these aren't directly connected at all. These are just two Western films that I wanted to watch, and we can compare it on a bigger genre trope level. So.
Yeah, I think, and what you described kind of gets to my pet peeve when we talk about Western trope, because, and what I dislike about it is the use of the word Western, because it implies this kind of regional, rural, parochial thing. And really it's just great storytelling models that we're most familiar with because they were so well used in Westerns.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Brian McDonald talks about how genre doesn't exist. And I agree with him. But like you got to put things in some certain box, and Western is the box we've chosen. Mm-hmm. Like Star Wars and Hidden Fortress, same thing. Story is not the set dressing. It's not the whether you have a katana or a 6-shooter. It's what happens. Mm-hmm. So both these films have great stories, and just if they didn't, we wouldn't be talking about them. So.
Well, one of the things that stands out, and I know we'll be doing the Criss Cross in a little bit, is how these are such protagonist-driven films,
right?
And yeah, I mean, and this is something they established early on with Bad Day, Black Rock, you have McCready getting off the train. With this film, it opens with the dramatic music, and you have Toshiro Mifume's character, Sanjuro, just dominating the screen,
right?
And he's just, while they're rolling the credits, he takes up, it's this panoramic shot. And it's the kind of thing where if you're trying to take a photograph of these mountains or this valley, you're kind of like, get out of the way, guy. You're blocking the shot.
He fills the whole frame.
And it already harkens to the fact that he is going to be so dominant in terms of what happens in this film.
And he has the key movement that I don't know if you picked up on, of he does this thing with his back where he twitches it, like he's got an itch or something, but that's his move, and that's a very Akira Kurosawa thing. I think it was really into movement of, like, that's his. You can, if you see him coming down the street and you see that back twitch, you're like, oh, okay, I know which character I'm looking at.
I read that Mifume was told by Kurosawa to play him like a wolf.
Oh, okay.
And you have to wonder if, like, it's that scratching that dogs do sometimes, where, especially on their back where they can't quite get to it.
Yeah, makes sense. So he comes into town, and it's a stranger coming into town. That's the biggest Western trope there is.
Well, actually, there are two things we want to, I think, address before we get to that, which is the first thing we see of him is the split in the path, and how he lets fate decide.
Yeah.
He basically just kind of throws up the stick and it falls, and okay, I'm going to go this way. And then he encounters the farmer,
right,
and his family, and how the son is. He decided he doesn't want to be a farmer. He's going to go off and go to the town.
He's run off to be a gambler.
He's run off to be a thug, really.
Yeah.
And it's a great way of alerting Sanjuro, whose name we don't have yet, of what he has to expect in this town.
Yeah, and to tell you who the bad guys are. Exactly.
That he learns, even before he gets there, there's a power struggle between these two gangs in this town. It's a town that the industries are silk, sake brewing, and there's also a brothel.
Right.
And so, but apparently that there's this power struggle in the town, and so.
Were there 3 sides?
Well, there weren't 3 sides.
Okay.
There were 3 businesses.
Okay, right. Okay.
And all of them are players in it.
I thought I missed something big.
No, the brothel owner, that was Saibai's business. The silk merchant and the sake brewer have taken sides.
Yeah.
And they're sort of the figureheads, but they're also the economic engines of the town. They're not the political powers, but they're the reason why the town's there. So,
Right.
So then Sanjuro goes into town, and oh my gosh.
First thing he sees when he walks into town. Is this what you're talking about?
Well, the first thing he sees it's the reaction of the people.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And again, it's an example where they're looking at him. There's a bit more curiosity, but there's also that wariness.
Yeah.
They're not used to seeing strangers. And so they don't know what to expect.
Right.
And Sanjuro's also trying to get a sense of the town.
He has no idea what to expect.
And then he sees something that tells him exactly what kind of town this is and what he has to look forward to.
A dog comes running through holding a severed hand in its mouth.
He's like,
oh my goodness, what?
He's not even running. He's trotting. He's kind of like, I'm a good dog. Look what he's proud of himself. I found a human hand.
Right. It's probably because I don't want to take you out of the story, but it's probably because the trainer is there like, oh, here you go. And he's like, I'm doing a good job.
Yes, exactly. And the look on Sanjuro's face is just like, it's just disgust and contempt. It's like he came into town with a low opinion of it based upon what he had heard, and it turned out he overestimated things.
It didn't match his expectations.
It's even lower than he thought.
Yeah.
And then he encounters one of the ostensible authority figures, which is the constable.
Right.
And
this guy, I don't know. I didn't get his deal.
You get the impression he's an authority figure.
Yeah.
He's the guy who should be the law enforcement of the town, and he just revels in the chaos.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I mean, he's not like Sheriff Tim Horn, who's
he is cowardly. At first, I didn't pick up on that because he's running from person to person, and he runs in and he tells Sandro, "Oh, this is what's happening in the town. It's so exciting."
And he advises Sanjuro, "This is the faction that you should go work for because they're going to." He's not saying I work for these guys. He's basically he's kind of like a specter. He's almost gleeful in it.
Yeah.
Get the impression he's a little crazy, which of course.
Yeah, that's the only thing that made any sense to me.
Which of course gets ends up feeding into what happens at the end of the movie. But he is just he says go talk to Yoshitora. He's the one you want to work for, and then you have this what Sanjuro is doing is he's kind of sizing up the situation.
Right.
And after hearing from the constable, he goes to the tavern, he meets Ganji. Ganji, tells him again. It's interesting. We've had basically at this point 3 summaries. Mm-hmm. The farmers, the constables, and Ganjis. And they're from different perspectives, but they're basically telling us the same thing. But I think from each of them, you're getting a different reaction of it. You're getting sort of a
different opinion on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's great character stuff of there's no reason for them to be there if they've just got the same opinion as the last guy.
This is when you hear Sanjuro making his choice of what he's going to do. And this is a film which has great lines. They're not, and yet I feel, and of course we have to, first of all, acknowledge the fact that what we're getting are the English translations. And the English translations may not capture how someone who understands Japanese would interpret this line, but the translations, the lines are so good, and yet they're not eloquent. It's just they're so powerful.
Yeah,
and the line that he says, "I'll get paid for killing, and this town is full of people who deserve to die."
Yeah.
he hasn't even met he hasn't even met the 2 factions yet, but he's already decided, oh God, this is what these guys do. Yeah, they deserve to die.
I must have missed that because the whole movie I was like, what is this guy's deal? Like, what is he he seemed like he was playing his own game, but I didn't know what the game was.
Yeah. He's just decided, we got to clean out this town. This town just, it's the rot has really taken in. We got to clean it out.
Yeah.
And then he goes to Seibe, the person he's been told, this is a weaker faction, because he knows he's going to get more money from them. But he doesn't say, I'm a master swordsman. I'm a Ronin. I'm offering my services to you. Yeah. He says, I'm a Ronin. I'm offering my services to you. And let me show you what I can do. And then he goes over to Yoshitora's side of town. And I mean, it's just like in Bad Day Black Rock. It's
one street town.
One street town.
Another trope.
Although it's not it's not like you traditionally might think of it as one side of town to the other being like across the street. It's like, one end of town to the other. So he's walking. So you get these great scenes all the time of walking, down the street from one side of town to another. Yeah. And all of Yoshitori's men come out. And he's meeting these three guys, and these guys are all advertising how tough they are. See these tattoos; these mean I'm a criminal. Oh, you think that's something? I've been, they're going to hang me as soon as they catch me. They're all advertising their toughness, and Sanjuro is just so contemptuous. He's like, "Oh, you guys are cute. Oh, yeah," and he provokes them, and he just slices them up in a matter of like 5 seconds. Yeah. It's like boom, 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 and they're down. These are like three of the toughest of Yoshitori's men, and Sanjuro just cuts them down in a heartbeat. What you're seeing here is, I think, is something that I think is also reflected in his initial reaction when he gets to town. Sanjuro is a professional. Yeah. He does everything professionally, with one or two exceptions, which I'm sure we'll get to. And what you see throughout this, I think, is sort of the professional's contempt for all these amateurs. It's not that the amateurs aren't dangerous. The amateurs are more dangerous because they don't know how to judiciously use violence. Mm-hmm. And so these three guys are threatening him. He demonstrates how easily he dispatches them, and then he goes up to the coffin maker and says, like, well, you're going to need 2 coffins. He looks over. 3. Better make that 3. Yeah. He's just so cool and casual, and he just like with that one gesture, he just demonstrates he is in control. He's in control. Yeah. I wanted to address the cinematography real quick. I mean, this is Akira Kurosawa. Like, you can't get better cinematography than this. These wide shots of him walking down the street, I don't know if you picked up on this, but you won't be able to not see it now. Yeah. There's always something moving in the background, like whether it's leaves blowing in or dust, or there's a scene where there's rain. It gives a really dynamic feel to the shot, but it's more than that. It gives you a third dimension feel. It makes you feel the depth of the shot. It really does convey a sense of emptiness. Yeah. And that's what I'm thinking about how in this film is just how hollow this whole town is. Yeah. And my favorite use of this is actually, okay, remind me of the bad guy's name again. Which one? There's the guy, the head of gang, there's the gamblers. The Ushitora. Ushitora's men are running out into the street, and there's just this flood of men coming out, and just that lateral movement is doing the same thing as the leaves are doing. And it's very intentional. It's cool. And it's another aspect of it that you see, which is that these men, when they come out, they kind of form like a crescent. They're very defensive. Mm-hmm. There's an element of fear, right, that pervades, and it gets to how they're amateurs. These are not men who are experienced with violence, who are professionals. These are people who are playing at being professionals. Yeah. And they don't quite know how to do. And of course, the three that are most confident about their abilities, the ones who are going to confront this stranger directly, demonstrate very quickly just how amateurish they are. Yeah. And they pay with their lives for this. So then, of course, he's advertised his abilities. He goes to Saibai and he says, now I've seen what I do. And Saibai of course, he also demonstrates how great of a businessman he is. Saibai is like, I'll pay you 1 ryo. I'll pay you 2. I'll pay you 6. That is 0 after that. That's how much I'm worth. Yeah. and you get the impression just how badly Saibai is doing and how accurate the constable's assessment is, where he's like, sure, okay, I'll pay you 60. And you find out about his situation, about how his wife Orin is the brains of the operation, and you see him meeting with his men, and all of his lieutenants are older men, and Saibai is serving him sake, and his hand is shaking. Yeah, you get the impression that the constable may be many things, but he's not delusional about who is who's in control, or is in charge. Yeah, but now that Sanjuro's there, Saibai has such confidence. He's like, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go at noon. We're going out. We're going to resolve this. Even though Saibai's master swordsman, who is quite possibly the smartest person in the group. He's like, yeah, I'm not sticking around for this. He takes off, and Sanjuro is like,
is that the guy with the striped robes and the gun?
No. That's that's Uno. Ushito's. That's Uno. That's the younger brother. No, it's. I think his name was. I want to say Honda, and he's like he's contemptuous about the idea that because he's basically been displaced in Saiwai's organization by Sanjuro. And also, I think he realizes that then Sanjuro is going to add an element that you don't want to be around for.
Oh, is that okay?
He jumps the fence.
The Turyo guy. Yeah, he runs away.
Yeah, he runs away. and Sanjuro, you look at him. He's not. He doesn't really hold it against the guy. He doesn't think the guy's. He almost gets the sense of smart man.
Yeah, that's funny.
So you have this confrontation.
There's also the sense of the danger coming up.
Yes, it's like the Master Swordsman knew what Sanjuro was about to do, which is that Sanjuro, by virtue of goading Saibai into the confrontation, you're going to get the confrontation. So Saibai's men come flooding out.
Yeah. And
Ushito's men come flooding out. And what does Sanjuro say? I quit.
Yeah.
and again, this is why I did appreciate the cinematography. He gets up on the tower. And so he's the professional, and he's looking down, laughing at these two groups of amateurs.
Yeah.
And they won't back down, but neither of them really want the confrontation. So they're playing this game of chicken.
Yeah.
Where they're like, they kind of rush up to each other and then rush away, rush up to each other and rush away.
Yeah, it's the weakest battle you've ever seen.
But they get closer every time, and you know that Sanjuro's about to get this confrontation that
Sanjuro has gone up on top of this bell tower and is looking down on them.
So it's such a great representation of his feelings of these clowns, but he is been able to trigger the event that he wants, and he hasn't even been in town for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
But then it gets stopped because you have the sudden presence of law and order.
Right.
Because inspector's coming.
Mm-hmm.
And the inspector is representative of the government, and now they all have to, kind of play nice. And so Sanjuro, he's able to trigger it, but it doesn't come off at the last minute because law and order belatedly asserts itself, or some semblance of it. And so he has to come up with a plan B. But Sanjuro still is very much the central figure. And so he's being courted by both sides. And there's that great scene in the tavern.
Yeah.
Where it's, trying to remember the guy's name, Inoichi, who is Yoshitaro's brother. He's got that magnificent unibrow.
It's so gross.
Yes, so gross. Well, you get the impression that there's that scene earlier, and I love how they establish, that it's not exactly the sharpest pencil in the case, where. He's walking by with these 3 recruits, and he's walking past the coffin maker, and he asks the coffin maker, what's the tally? The coffin maker says, I made 2 coffins for Ushitara, but I made 4 coffins for Saibai. And Inoichi has to sit there with his fingers. Okay, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. Oh, we're ahead. Yeah. And he's so pleased with himself. I can't tell if he's pleased with the outcome or pleased with the fact that he figured out
the numbers.
Exactly. 4 is a bigger number than 2. Yeah. But he's courting Sanjuro, and Onri is courting, and so Sanjuro clearly is still very much in the driver's seat and able to dictate this until he hears word that there is a truce in the offing, and that this is the inspiration of Unosuke, or Uno, who's the youngest brother. And he really is the true antagonist. It's like once he's on the scene, Sanjuro's job gets so much more difficult because, and this truce is going to totally sabotage Sanjuro's plans, because as he puts it, all that's going to do is going to delay the violence and make it more so down the road. This is not the confrontation that he wants. He wants a reckoning now, He doesn't want to sit around this town for months waiting for something to happen. And he certainly doesn't want to leave it. This is where you get the sense that Sanjuro is a pretty good guy because he wants a resolution. And although he is able to make something out of the truce, but Ushitara gets the inspector out of town by hiring a couple of guys to kill someone somewhere else. So the inspector has to go take care of that. And
this is where the constable reacts, where he's like, "Ooh, the inspector's out of town," and it's like, okay, I really don't get what this guy's deal is.
He's just you get the impression he might be. Ooh, we're gonna have some action again. He's excited for the fact that there's more bloodshed that he should be dealing with instead of sitting around popping popcorn to watch.
Yeah,
and so Sanjuro is able to reignite the situation because the two assassins come to the town and they're drinking sake, and Sanjuro captures them, wraps them up, delivers them to Saibai, and says, "You can use this to destabilize Ushitara because you turn these guys over to the authorities, and not, of course, the useless constable, but the higher authorities, and instantly these guys are going to out Ushitara and the whole thing's going to collapse. And Saibai is like rubbing his hands greedily. And then he goes and tells, "Oh yeah, Saibai has your men." Not saying that, he's not explaining he turned them over to Saibai. It's like, "Oh yeah, Saibai's men captured them."
Yeah.
And Ushitara, who's been so snookered by Sanjuro at this point, he's like, he just instantly believes that that's how it happened. So he kidnaps he kidnaps Saibai's son. So there's going to be this exchange. And again, this is where you see how Uno is really the true threat, because the exchange doesn't come off because Uno has a gun.
Yeah.
And this is something that it's something that I think gets a little lost on Western viewers, which is that during this period in Japanese history, firearms were prohibited. They were not unknown.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
But there had been, at the beginning of the Tokugawa era, after the Tokugawa shogunate had asserted itself, they had rounded up all the firearms. It was about centralizing weaponry.
Yeah.
So and this is something that's more familiar in the sense of that only the samurai could carry swords, and anybody else who did so was subject to punishment. And so what you're seeing here is it's very funny. It's literally a Western influence.
Yeah. Because
it's a 6-shooter.
Yeah.
And Uno is so proud of this thing.
Yeah.
And he thinks it just makes him such a man.
Yeah, there's a line later on where he's like, "I feel naked without my gun."
Yeah, exactly. And you also see how this is what's going to actually end up unraveling the Tokugawa, is the fact that they're starting to lose control of these things, and how it's a great representation of how Uno is challenging Sanjuro's mastery of the situation.
Yeah.
In the fact that he can deliver violence. You get the impression that Uno is not right in the head. He can deliver violence however he wants. And he instantly does it. There's these two assassins in front of him. We're supposed to be trading for them. You know what? It's even more effective if you just kill them. Bang, bang, dead. And they've got Saibai's son, which they can leverage to get Saibai out of town. So Ushitora's faction is going to win. But no, Saibai's kidnapped Ushitora's favorite, to put it bluntly, sex slave.
Yeah.
And that forces an exchange that's not going to get that's not going to be sabotaged.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting with this exchange. Like, they didn't really set up who the characters were that were being traded beforehand, at least that I saw. But anyway,
you're introduced to Saibai's son when.
The son, yeah, but the concubine, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
That gets introduced during the exchange when her son and her husband are watching it from the tavern.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And that's when you.
Yeah. it's simultaneously, and it's like, okay, this would have had more emotional had you told this stuff earlier, but it's just. Anyway, it's just interesting that they don't tell it beforehand. That's conventional storytelling.
I think there's a trade-off there because by waiting until then, you also see how another element that's disrupting Sanjuro's plans. And where would you say the first act of this movie ends?
First act would be possibly that first battle. I'm not sure.
So the first act basically is Sanjuro trying to set things up and his plan nearly come to fruition. The second act seems to be about how his efforts are constantly being frustrated by all these external factors.
Right.
First, it's the inspector's presence. Then it's Uno and his kind of X factor, his random use of violence, and the fact that he's probably the smartest guy in Ushitora's gang.
Yeah.
And then you have the fact he discovers that this woman is being held captive, and even though he's very contemptuous of her husband because this is gambling that led Ushitora to kidnap his wife and have his way with her, and she's interesting. She's like the really beautiful figure. It's like earlier when
Sanjuro
goes to work for Saibai, and you see the prostitutes.
Yeah.
They're not exactly the pick of the litter.
Yeah. when he has them, or she has them dancing for him, it's
exactly.
He could not care any less.
Yeah, exactly. Because and part of it is the fact that he's professional. Part of it is also that they're not very appealing. But the wife of this farmer, she is really beautiful. You can and you get you get the impression his heart really goes out to her.
Yeah.
And even though he's contemptuous of her husband for losing her and contemptuous of her husband for his weakness, he's like, but he puts himself out there.
Right.
And again, it confirms, I think, just how good of a character he is, to where he's going to intervene in the situation in such a way as to free her. So he goes to Ushitora, says, I'm going to work for you now. And then
I hadn't caught at that point that's the reason he went to go work for him.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then of course, immediately after Ushitora is like, okay, now we got you working for her. And he's like, well, is she secure? And he said, I got five tough guys guarding her. And he says,
6, but yeah.
It's gonna be 6. And it's like, 6 may not be enough. And so
he puts that idea in his head.
Exactly.
And then he goes and he kills the 6 guys, frees the lady, gives them back to the farmer.
And he stages the scene.
Yeah, he stages the scene to look like it was more people like cutting up the house, which is much easier in Japanese houses.
Yes, it is.
But
and I love how it's the fact that Ushitora sends Inohichi with him. Yeah. And it's like it makes Sanjuro's job so much easier because this is a guy he gets the impression that maybe he lacks object permanence or something, but it's kind of like you throw something in his way and also says, oh yeah.
So he didn't get that lesson when he was a kid.
so he gets easily distracted, so he can have Inoichi go away, so he can go on stage and kill all the other guys and have Inoichi almost serve as kind of like a witness that no, things were this way, but this allows him to escalate the situation because now Ushitora thinks that Saibai has this woman that's his favorite, so he burns down the mayor's silk warehouse. Yeah, mayor's on
there's this great shot of Uno with he's in close up and the house is behind him, and it goes up in flame, and he's just got this wicked smile on his face, and it's a great shot. And again, with the movement, fire can get that movement in there.
Oh yeah. He's got that actor just has such a great look on his face when he's doing that.
Yeah.
And they're saying, give us back the woman, and Ushitora has no idea what he's talking about. It's just like, we don't have her.
And I don't envy whenever I guess Akira Kurosawa, I guess he's an expert at it, but I don't envy him when he had to film that shot of it's like, okay, we can only burn this down once. Please get the right expression on your face.
Exactly. And this is where you really see the town unraveling because the silk, earlier they were alluding to the fact that there's like a silk festival or something where all the silk is sold. And by burning down the warehouse, you've destroyed that stock. You've basically negated the festival.
Oh, yeah.
And then Saibai retaliates by destroying the brewery.
Yeah.
So
they're destroying the whole town's economy.
Yeah, they're literally gutting the town.
Yeah.
Because and this may not be what Sanjuro had intended in the first place. He just wanted these two gangs to kill each other, but it's effectively now the situation's escalating beyond the point at which there's going to be no truce now.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Everything's on the table or burned.
And then you get that great scene where the coffin maker and the tavern owner are talking, and the tavern owner, because and you start with the scene in the streets, there are bodies now just lying around.
Yeah.
Of all these dead thugs. And the tavern keeper says, "Oh, you should be happy. Look at all this new business." And the coffin maker despairs. And the line is just so wonderful. When the fighting gets this bad, they don't even bother with coffins.
Yeah. So even his business is going down.
Yeah. And this is when he becomes more, he basically is more willing to, help end things. He's realized that violence, even though his business is death in a way, that, it's not a good business to be in at this point. And that Sanjuro has basically succeeded in convincing this guy to want to bring this ugly situation in the town to an end.
And is this after Sanjuro's been imprisoned?
No, it's just before.
Okay. Well, spoiler.
Yeah,
he gets imprisoned.
Well, it's the next scene, which is where Sanjuro's in the tavern. He's having some sake, and Uno comes in, and he says, well, we've been trying to recruit people and we haven't had any luck, which tells you how bad things are getting, because between having sent away a bunch of people earlier because they thought the truce was on, where they're all bitter about the fact that they've been, lied to. And then of course, now seeing how bad things are getting, people are like, oh, I don't want to be part of this. But then he's like, well, we actually heard an interesting rumor. We heard that the woman that we thought Saibai had, turns out that there was a sighting of her and her husband and her brat son, her brat kid, in this other area. So, and that's when Uno's saying, we've proven that we found out that you're not really on our side. And I love that scene.
Yeah,
because it's shot a bit up. You have Sanjuro in the foreground to the left. You have Uno facing him to the right, and in the front you have the edge of the table, and you have Sanjuro's hand edging towards his sword.
Oh yeah, that's suspense.
It is great suspense. Yeah. And the way that the actor who plays, I mean, we talk about Toshiro Infume, but the acting in this is great, and the way it's not like that Uno's like, he just see it happening and just kind of like waits. He's like, I see what you're doing. And then he does it. And then the tavern keeper tries to help out Sanjuro, and he catches that, which is the letter that the farmer wrote thanking him, which really dumb.
Yeah.
So it kind of gets to, it's the frustration of the professional. You see that earlier on where, when Sanjuro's freed the farmer's wife, and he says, like, go run away, and then he goes and he trashes the house where she's been held by the thugs. Yeah. And he goes out there, and they're on the ground basically trying to honor him and everything. He's like, you idiots, go.
Yeah.
And now he's seen they're just so grateful, and he's like, as a professional, it's like, gratitude. I don't want your gratitude. I did it because it needed to be done, and the gratitude ends up, costing him enormously.
Yeah. Well, jumping back real quick to that shot of him reaching for the sword, that is the simplest way to do suspense in your movie if you want to do that. Mm-hmm. You've got in the same frame somebody looking off frame usually. Okay, let me use a couple examples. So in The Birds, there's the shot of her sitting in front of the playground, and there's the swing set behind her, which is the most important thing. And the birds start flying in. On the jungle gym, the birds start flying in, and it slowly gets more full and more full. And you're like, just look. And so the Sanjuro shot of him reaching for the sword under the table and the other guy not looking, that's suspense also. Mm-hmm. And then there's another Hitchcock shot in Marnie. Marnie is trying to steal something from a safe. It's a really wide shot that's split in half. And this is a great way to do suspense of, you can see what's outside the room, and there's, into the shot comes a cleaning lady, and she's slowly closer coming to the room with the safe in it. And you're like, no, go, don't. Yeah. That's how you do suspense.
Yeah. It was really well done, because you think that maybe, because Sanjuro, he up to this point, he's been, fairly on top of the situation, but Once he can't get to his sword, he is as vulnerable as anyone else. And boy, do they take it out on him.
They do. And this is an interesting point to mention. This is a strange comment. I don't know how you can react to this, but the guy with the hammer, the big thug,
oh yeah,
he reminded me of what is his name? Oh, Lurch from Addams Family, the actor who plays him.
Ted, gosh, I can't think of his name. It's interesting. He gets compared to actors like that. I've he's kind of like, Andre the Giant and Richard Kiel. He's an actor whose physicality just makes him so imposing of a presence. Mm-hmm. And you kind of feel bad for him in a way, in the sense that he's not exactly going to play the romantic lead in a lot of movies, but he is so good. And I love his weapon. All these men have swords.
He's got a giant hammer. What are you going to do with a hammer? But he's huge. He's going to mash you with it.
He's almost like a character in a video game. You expect you're going to see like a bonk sound appear whenever he hits someone with something like that.
For sure.
But yeah, I mean, man, it does not look good for Sanjuro.
Yeah,
he is getting he's basically getting beaten up. They're supposedly trying to torture him for information as to where Nui went, the woman. But you get the impression also they're just working out their frustration.
Yeah, it's just these two guys that you can tell they'd rather be doing anything else, but they're in between their game of chess. I don't think it was chess, but whatever they're playing, the giant guy would go, "Okay, time to rough you up."
Yeah. And of course they're getting nothing because Sanjuro made it a point not to know anything.
Yeah.
But then because they've been throwing him around, they've busted open the lock on this chest, and Sanjuro uses as an opportunity to get away.
Yeah.
And when he gets away, Ushitora just loses it, and he decides. So Sanjuro is being smuggled out of town by the tavern keeper and the coffin maker.
Right.
And he's being smuggled out in a coffin. Mm-hmm. But because they're pausing, I can't remember why they pause. He sees what happens to Saibai's family, which is Ushitora is, so frustrated. He's just like, we're just going to smoke him out. So he burns down the brothel, which is like practically the last, which is one of the last functioning businesses. Yeah. And he kills Saibai, kills his wife, kills his son. And oh my gosh, this is where you see, he's just so incredibly dumb. His character is such great comic relief. That guy steals every scene he's in.
The eyebrow guy. Right?
Yeah, the eyebrow guy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But Sanjuro gets away and he recuperates, and he's not done, but he definitely has had it rough, and he also doesn't have any weapons, and so he has to kind of reassess things. But then Ganji, the tavern keeper, is discovered that he's helping Sanjuro. Mm-hmm. And so Ushitoro's men, Ushitoro at this point, he runs the town, what's left of it.
Yeah.
And so it's not like Sanjuro can continue play. He's got to have that direct confrontation. And that gets to the climax. And oh my gosh, it is such a good climax.
Yeah. Oh, the framing of when they're approaching each other in this final fight is just chef's kiss is not enough for that. Yeah. It's okay. They've got the blowing dust in the background that I talked about. That's like at the end of the street. So you can tell how far the end of the street is, and them just walking up, and they've got the wide shot, and it keeps getting closer and closer in on them as they come up. And it's just great.
It's Sanjuro by himself.
Yeah.
With Ushitora, with Uno, with Inoichi, and I think like their last 3 or 4 remaining men.
Yeah.
And this is where, again, you see the difference between the professional and the amateurs.
Yeah.
Because even though Uno has his gun, even though Sanjuro is outnumbered by like 10-1, he takes him out. He knows exactly how to do it. First, he immobilizes Uno's shooting hand, and then he slices up all the other guys, and he doesn't even seem to break a sweat doing it.
Yeah.
And he spares someone, though. And I did not realize this until the second time I saw it. The person he spares is the son of the farmer from the beginning of the movie.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
And that's why he says to him, you're playing, with the sword. And
oh, okay. Oh, yeah, the one that's like just completely.
Yeah, he's
groveling against the wall, and he's like, ah!
Yeah, he's wetting his pants, and he's like, just go back to your farm. I'm giving you a pass. He's almost returning the favor to the farmer.
Yeah,
for getting the drink of water. You gave me a drink of water.
That's good.
I'll let your son live. And it's like the one person he in these factions that he openly
almost
spared.
like he's Elijah or something.
Exactly. And then you get this wonderful outlier scene where the constable shows up, and this guy has always kind of had this bug-eyed weird look on his face.
Yeah,
but he's banging on a prayer drum. He goes up to the sake brewer who was the was the kind of the front mayor for Ushitora, and he kills him.
Yeah,
it's just like he's totally lost it. And then you get that great line. Sanjuro is looking at all this, and he says, it'll be quiet in this town now.
Yeah, then he just turns around and walks away.
Yeah, well, it's not fun. He just say like, "I'll see you around," and then he just takes off.
And that's his walk into the sunset moment. There's no sunset. He just walks off.
Oh
down
my
the
gosh!
Down the street.
Oh, and that's the end. It's not a drawn out thing. He just turns around, walks, and Kurosawa just ends it. He's like, we don't even see him walking away. He's walking away. That's done.
And that's solid storytelling. The story's done. Cut it off.
Yeah, I just keep thinking back to that great line, and I think I may have already referenced this in a previous podcast. That great line from Tacitus about, they made it a desert and called it peace. I mean, that's pretty much what Sanjuro's solution to this problem. We'll just make it a desert. Hey, town's pretty quiet now. So
yeah, kind of a. I don't know what is the word. Apocalyptic ending. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. It's very desolate. It's kind of like he finally achieves the town. It's kind of he's completed the desolation of the town that he has seen from the beginning. Because I was thinking back to when you were describing the scenes with like the leaves and the dust blowing. Mm-hmm. To me, it always gave a sense as I was saying, the hollowness of the town.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, it's hollow except for all these thugs. We clean them out, then it is truly hollow. We're just leaving behind the tavern keeper and the coffin maker and this crazy constable, and that's about it. That's all that's left. Because after all, everything else is gone. The brewery's gone. the brothel's gone.
For sure.
The silk is gone.
Their entire economy is burned down.
Yeah. But hey, at least the gang war's over.
I guess. Yeah.
So
every once in a while, two films will share a bond to transcend time, space, and even genre. These similarities go down to their DNA. So let's dissect and deconstruct, compare and contrast. It's time to go crisscross.
Crisscross.
Now, I can see a few obvious similarities, but I feel as though there are elements that even after a couple viewings eluded me. So what similarities did you identify in terms of the two films?
Well, I've got a list. Yeah, I've got 6 main similarities of Western tropes that I spotted. And that's the main connection, seemingly ironically, because it's an Eastern movie and a Western movie, but a lot of movies that are Westerns came from originally being samurai movies, most notable of which is the Seven Samurai and Magnificent Seven. And so here we go. Trope number 1, a one-street town. Trope number 2, stranger comes to town. So you've got MacReady in Bad Day at Black Rock and Sanjuro in Yojimbo. Trope number 3, a powerful boss in town. It's Mr. Smith in Bad Day at Black Rock. And in Yojimbo, there's actually 2, the 2 bosses. I wouldn't describe one of them as that powerful, but there's 2 bosses causing havoc in town. And the main character has to come and clean up. Well, in one of them, and this gets to the kind of, you called it a neo-Western for Bad Day at Black Rock, of it kind of subverts some of those tropes of he's not coming into town to clean it up. The only thing he's interested in is the thing he's there to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they usually start out with the person not interested, but it's usually the inciting incident that they do get interested for some reason. In Yojimbo, it's because he's paid to.
And with McCready, it's his mission.
And yeah, McCready, he's not there to clean up the town. It just happens to be the case that the thing that he's after, the death of, what is the Komoko?
Komoko.
Yeah, the death of Komoko just happens to be the same cause for the same catalyst for what's wrong in the town. And he's just there to give him his medal, but he's dead.
You could also argue that Sanjuro isn't there to clean up the town. He's there to basically cash in, and clean up the town is just the consequence of killing all these people.
Yeah. He's a professional that just wants to be paid to. He likes killing, I suppose. Number 4, a cowardly sheriff or a cowardly constable in Yojimbo, which he might also just be described as a crazy constable. He's very into it, but he's not doing his job. So
it's not just that he's not doing his job in Yojimbo, he's enabling the chaos.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, you could argue that Jagger's character does that in Bad Day by passively, but he's not actively saying to McCready, go do the corruption there.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, trope number 5. This one is just for Bad Day at Black Rock, a speech to call the cowardly sheriff to action. Usually this works in Westerns. I've seen at least one John Wayne movie where he's called the cowardly sheriff to action and he joined the posse and helped them. But in this one, that trope is subverted and he just takes off. He doesn't want to be a part of it.
It suggests that one of the differences is that in Bad Day at Black Rock, the town is potentially redeemable.
Right.
The only way that Sanjuro cleans up the town Yojimbo is by
cleaning out the people.
Yeah, by cleaning out the people. Exactly.
It's not a single normal citizen. Well, maybe the restaurant owner.
Yeah, the tavern keeper. You have the coffin maker,
right?
And then of course you have the one body thug that he didn't kill. He said sort of spanked him and sent him back to his dad.
Yeah, the farmer's son.
And that's it. Everyone else is dead. The gang leaders, the mayor. Oh, and presumably the constable is still alive, but you know, he's probably gonna get packed off to whatever the
insane asylum.
Yeah, to wherever the Tokugawa equivalent of that was. So
right. Trope number 6. This one's just in Yojimbo. He walks into the sunset. Well, we have it in Bad Day in Black Rock too. He does take off, but he gets on a train and he goes. But it's that same trope. They take off and they go. Doesn't have to be a literal sunset. In fact, it isn't for both of these.
It's riding off into the distance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
they got to leave the town and move on to the next place that needs them, which in Yojimbo, Sanjuro will stop in his next movie, Sanjuro.
No spoilers. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either. We might want to cover it. Okay, then there's a battle at high noon in Yojimbo. And then also in Yojimbo, there's a man on his own side. So I suppose that would be the case for Bad Day at Black Rock, but there's
it works. It works in both in the sense that they're both on their own side.
Yeah.
And each of them has to basically recruit people. In the case of Yojimbo,
right.
Sanjuro gets the tavern keeper and eventually the coffin maker. And whereas with McCready, he has to recruit the sheriff, Doc, and then Pete. So for a little bit, we think Pete's sister. Liz. I forget her name. Yeah, Liz. And of course, we saw how that went.
Yeah, not so well.
Well, there's one other one that this stood up for me when I was watching it, which was there's this exploration of masculinity.
Right.
And it's interesting how in both characters, you really have one person, the protagonist, who really is this model for masculinity.
Yeah.
And everyone else is either engaged in this performative masculinity, which is just sad.
Yeah.
Or they are basically they sort of abandoned these masculine roles and are playing this more supine or subservient thing.
Yeah.
And the where you see what stands out for me in that contrast is these two fight scenes that we have talked about. One being when Coley picks his fight with McCready.
Yeah.
And you see McCready, he knows violence. We see that very quickly, but he avoids it until it is unavoidable.
Right.
And in Yojimbo, you have Sanjuro, who employs violence, but the way he tried to employ it is by staging the fight between the two gangs, which he nearly succeeds in accomplishing.
Yeah.
And it's funny how you have literally the entire town of men is on this street, and they're being called upon to engage in this aggressive combat, and they're spending more time shrieking at each other and waving their weapons in the hope of because they think this is how
none of them swings a single blow at the
exactly. They're all busy trying to pretend that they're tougher,
right,
and that they're more effective than they really are. It's the most
pathetic battle you've ever seen.
Exactly. So it made such a highlight of it. And of course, the one person who has that, who's achieved that ideal of masculinity, he's just he's sitting away from it. He's observing it all. And he just has this big old grin on his face, just trying to keep back the laughter.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the draw because it's a very male genre of the Western it's this one strong male figure that's just making his way through the desert or through, I guess, Sanjuro, through the Japanese countryside. And there's just something that is, I guess it's the self-reliance thing to it. Mm-hmm. And my favorite game is Fallout New Vegas, which I mentioned at the beginning. I just love that feel of you just roaming through the countryside, gathering your stuff, and it's you versus the world. And with this one, with every Western movies, they're coming from that journey, and they come into a town, and they've got no connection to this town, no reason to help them, but out of the goodness of their heart, they finally see that they need to help. And it's a great trope.
It's fascinating how you've identified something that I think is so key to why Westerns remain popular.
Yeah.
They're not as popular they're not as dominant.
They keep coming back. They're not say popular like an MCU thing right now, but they're not as popular as they were. They don't die off. They basically weren't. I mean, during their peak from say the 30s through the 60s, they're not as popular as that. But you have that recurring popularity. People keep returning to. I mean, John Wayne is still a very iconic figure today in a way that virtually none of his other contemporaries are. We don't speak about any number of the other actors of his era the way we still talk about him. And what makes that so fascinating for me is that you see that as well in these samurai films that we've described, mm-hmm. but they just don't. And you would think that people that they would make these films more popular in America than they are. Right.
But apparently the setting, the language is just too much. But
yeah, there's too much of a barrier. I've got to read subtitles, and I've got to understand the culture of what's happening. And it's just, I don't know, too much. Much homework you got to do to watch a movie. That's not I don't know.
And they could also complain about the lack of firearms, but they solved that in Yojimbo.
Yeah, for sure. And it's with movies, there's a low entry fee mm-hmm. of you sit down and you get more emotionally invested as you sit for longer, but there's just kind of too much homework you got to do for foreign movies. You can't really just kind of just slide into it the way that it's so easy to do. I can see how the way that we could just watch movies by sometimes turning on the TV and just picking up in the middle. It is hard to do that with the foreign mill. Although I would say it does pay off if you watch that. It's the greatest thing about older movies, and I suppose this would apply to foreign movies as well, is if you let yourself have the experience, it transports you to another place. There's nothing better than that.
Oh, it's definitely well worth the investment.
39 Steps and Strangers on a Train, which is actually one of my favorite movies. And it's exactly what it does. It takes you to some different place, and there's that cool feel of, oh, they were funny back then, and that kind of thing.
I mean, for me, it's films like Casablanca,
Yeah.
Kind Hearts and Coronets. Yeah, it's so easy to just take a film that seems so alien and just so find it. The tone, the differences end up becoming part of the charm.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, now for our star ratings. Okay, what would you give Bad Day at Black Rock?
I have to give it 5 out of 5.
I gotta go 5 too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a great movie.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna be really boring, but I'm gonna say 5 out of 5 for Yojimbo too.
Yeah.
It's just I kind of feel like maybe I think back in so many of our films, I'm ending up giving 4 or 5 stars. We need to start choosing some subpar movies.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna have some in a couple weeks. But
Okay.
yeah, for this one, I'd have to give it 4 stars. It's solid.
Yeah, I mean, I think there may be 1 or 2 samurai films I like just a little bit better, but I mean, for me, this is just tops. I can see why it has become such an iconic movie and one that has been duplicated and adapted in other genres.
Yeah, for sure. If you'd like to access bonus features and deleted clips from Criss Cross and our sister show Facets of Story, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Transcend Entertainment. That's TRANSCEND Entertainment. Our next episode, I'll be turning the keys over to Mark. It's Mark's first pick, 25th Hour and The Creator. And I really have no idea what the connection between these two is, so I'm very curious to see.
And hopefully in turning over the keys to me, I won't end up driving us into a ditch.
That's it for today's Criss Cross Cinema Podcast.
But you wouldn't clap yet, because making something disappear isn't enough. You have to bring it back.
Criss Cross.